You were prepared. Rigid expression, closed posture. All the answers were at the tip of your tongue, the arguments ready, the barriers up. There was no room to yield, to listen, let alone to feel. But then, one word was spoken, simple, unarmed, and it was enough. The gaze wavered. The body stiffened for a moment as if unsure how to respond. You expected confrontation, you anticipated resistance, but what came was something unexpected, softness, and then silence. The armor began to feel heavy. What once seemed like protection now became a burden. Breath grew deeper, the eyes sought refuge. Perhaps there was an attempt to disguise it, but it became evident, it was felt. Because sometimes all it takes to stop fighting is a single word. But what happens next? The impact doesn't fade. It reverberates. It spreads. It seeps through cracks that seemed sealed. Silence lingers, but it's not empty. It's a loaded silence, almost an invisible weight in the air. The internal struggle becomes clear. To continue carrying that wall or finally let go of what has suffocated for so long. The restless hands, the averted gaze, the changing breath. Small signs of a conflict that no one can see, but is there, unfolding. The mind races in search of justifications. It was just a word. It wasn't an attack, it wasn't a confrontation, but still, something inside became destabilized. And the question arises unavoidable. Why did this stir so much? What was it about that word that made everything waver? Perhaps it was the tone, the way it was said effortlessly, without aggression, as if there was nothing to be won or conquered, only given. Or maybe it was what that word represented, something unexpected, something you weren't ready to handle. Because the truth is that hardness doesn't come from nowhere. Defenses aren't built without reason. They are constructed layer by layer, after each scar, after every disappointment. They serve to protect, to keep intact what has been broken so many times. But now, for the first time, a doubt arises. What if it's no longer necessary to protect oneself? What if, for the first time in a long while, it's safe to let the guard down? The body feels it before the mind can accept it. There's a knot in the throat that wasn't there before. A strange pressure in the chest, an urge to speak but not knowing exactly what to say. Silence prevails. The word still echoes. There's no need for more explanations or justifications. There are no arguments to be made. The heart has already understood. But accepting, that takes time. The walls don't fall all at once. They crack, fragment slowly. There's a resistance, a fear. Because letting go of armor means being exposed, and being exposed means risking being hurt. But at the same time, it also means being able to feel, being able to breathe without the weight of what has been accumulated over the years. And it's in that moment, in that small space between resistance and surrender, that something changes. A long sigh, a gaze that finally lifts. No more words, no more need for words, because something has already been understood. The struggle is over. And for the first time in a long time, there is peace. But what comes next? What follows after a barrier falls? Because the impact of a word doesn't end the moment it's spoken. It spreads, continues to exist. What has been stirred doesn't return to how it was before. The mind revisits that moment over and over, as if trying to find a way to deny what it felt, to convince itself that it was just a fleeting moment. But it was more than that. It was a rupture, and ruptures cannot be undone, because once a truth is felt, it cannot be forgotten. And then a new challenge arises. What to do now? Because pretending nothing happened is no longer an option. Pretending that word had no effect, that it didn't touch you, that it didn't penetrate, is no longer possible. But accepting this new reality, that takes courage. Because it means change. It means moving from a state of protection to a state of vulnerability. It means letting go of old shields and, for the first time, trusting. But is it really that simple? Because even after everything, even after the word was spoken, the impact felt, the heavy silence, there's still fear. Fear of completely letting your guard down. Fear of allowing yourself to feel. Because feeling means making space for the unexpected. And the unexpected always brings risks, but it also brings something that armor could never provide. Lightness. And now there's a choice. To keep carrying the weight of what's always been familiar, or to release it and allow something new to happen. And this choice? It began being made the moment that word crossed all barriers. Now it's only a matter of accepting. The silence no longer weighs as it did before. There's no longer that need to maintain a rigid posture, to hide restless hands, to hold your breath to avoid showing what's happening inside. The internal struggle still exists, but it's different. It's no longer a war to resist. Now it's a battle between the fear of surrendering and the need to feel, because it has become clear that something has changed. The word stayed. It didn't vanish, didn't dissipate into the air like so many others that have been heard and discarded. It wasn't just a sound, a phrase thrown to the wind. It was a truth, and truths have weight. So now, what to do with this? Ignore it. Pretend that nothing was felt. Try to rebuild the walls as if they had never cracked. Or for the first time admit that these barriers no longer make much sense. The body has already understood, but the mind still resists. For so long, armor has been the only protection. For so long, hardening has been the only way to survive. Now opening up to the new feels like walking into uncharted territory. Scary, uncertain, uncomfortable. The instinct is to retreat, to pretend nothing has happened. But there's no turning back. The word has already made an impact. The heart has already felt the difference. And denying this means continuing to carry a burden that never needed to be eternal. But what if it's a trap? What if letting down your guard means getting hurt again? Fear whispers. It insists. It tries to hold on. But there's something greater growing inside. A subtle yet undeniable desire to allow oneself. Because there's something unquestionable about what was felt. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't an attempt to bring down, to hurt, to win. It was simply a gesture, simply a word. And for the first time, perhaps it's not necessary to fight against it. Maybe for the first time it's safe to just accept. But how? How do you unlearn what has been taught by pain? How do you leave behind the idea that making space means being hit? It doesn't happen all at once. It's not immediate. The resistance is still there. The fear still exists. But something has started to give. Shoulders relax a bit. Breathing becomes less constrained. The gaze is no longer glued to the ground. These are small signs, almost imperceptible. But for someone who has always been closed off, they are huge. Because allowing yourself to feel is not weakness, it's courage, it's a process, and it all begins the moment you choose to stop resisting. The word has been spoken. It is here to stay. Now the choice is to let it transform, because in the end that's what the right words do. They arrive without warning, they disarm without violence, and they change everything. Time passes, but the feeling doesn't go away. That word remains there, occupying an invisible space within everything that once felt impenetrable. The mind tries to convince itself that nothing has changed, that everything can go back to the way it was before. But something is different now, something that doesn't allow things to be simply ignored. Because now there is awareness. Before, the weight of the armor wasn't felt. It was just part of the body, a natural extension of what one had become. But after the word, after the silent impact it caused, the weight became real. And for the first time a desire arises, not to react, not to defend oneself, but to relieve this burden, maybe just for a moment, to let this barrier down, just to see what happens, just to feel what it's like. But there's still hesitation, because it's hard to detach from what has been carried for so long. It's hard to trust in what cannot be predicted. And what if it's a mistake? And if this openness poses a risk, but what if it doesn't? What if for the first time it's possible to experience something different, without having to fight, without having to resist? The word has already done its work. It has cracked the wall. It has shown that not everything needs to be a battleground. Now all that's left is the step that no one can take for the one who feels. The step that requires letting go of control, that requires lowering the guard, that requires trusting. The body is still reluctant, but the mind has already understood. The fingers close and open, as if they want to hold something, but at the same time let go. The breath hesitates between shallow and deep. The eyes once fixed on a distant point now move, trying to find a new place to focus. Something is about to happen, a moment of surrender, a fraction of a second where the barrier finally dissolves. There are no words for this moment. There is no precise explanation for this feeling. It's just an unexpected relief, a sudden liberation without anyone needing to do anything more. It just happens, without effort, without resistance, and when you realize it, it has already happened. There's no longer the same hardness. There's no longer the same need to hide. There is no longer the same barrier between feeling and allowing oneself to feel. And then comes peace. Not a grand peace, not something loud or transformative in an instant, but something small, subtle. A light sensation, as if a weight has been placed on the ground. As if for the first time in a long time it's no longer necessary to bear it all alone. The internal struggle stops, and in its place there's just the certainty that some words are not weapons. Some words do not come to harm, they come to free, and this was one of them. The weight is gone, but the feeling remains. It's not as if everything changed all at once. There are still doubts. There's still a trace of that automatic resistance that's built up over time. But something fundamental has shifted. Now there's a space where rigidity once existed. It's no longer necessary to hold on so tightly. It's no longer necessary to keep the guard always up. The body senses this before the mind can fully accept it. The shoulders no longer carry that constant tension. The breath is no longer so restrained. The gaze no longer shies away from what was once avoided. It's a process, and every second in this new reality is a test to see how far one can go without rebuilding the walls. But the truth is that they have already started to crumble, and rebuilding them would be harder than letting them fall completely. What happens now? Now comes the emptiness that has always been there but was masked by the hardness. Because when defenses fall, what remains? What do you do with the space that was once occupied by the need to fight? That emptiness is frightening, because fighting, resisting, keeping distance, all of that gave a purpose, a reason to continue in the same way without questioning. But without that armor, without that shield, there's only what has always been there. What was denied, repressed, hidden. The old pain, the scars that were never truly seen, the emotions that were never accepted. This is where many people back away. Because facing what remains after the defenses have fallen is harder than continuing to carry their weight. But this time, something prevents escape. Maybe it's the unexpected lightness that came with this change. Maybe it's the feeling that, for the first time, there's something different in the air. Maybe it's simply exhaustion. Exhaustion from fighting all the time, because there comes a moment when the battle stops making sense. And maybe that moment has arrived, but fully accepting this still requires courage. The urge to shut down again is still there, like an instinct, because feeling, as liberating as it may be, is also frightening. What if it's a mistake? What if it's too soon? What if there's still danger? The mind creates scenarios, tries to build justifications for retreating, tries to find reasons not to allow this change. But all attempts fail, because deep down, the truth has already been felt. And once felt, there's no going back. The only possible way is to move forward. But forward to where? What comes after a fallen barrier? Now it's a new kind of challenge. It's no longer about resisting. Now it's about learning to walk without this armor, learning to feel without the constant fear of being hit, learning to trust, even if gradually, and above all, learning to be present. Because without the armor, everything becomes more intense. The words reach deeper, the gestures mean more, the silence carries more than just the absence of sound. And at first, this can be overwhelming, because when you spend so much time filtering everything, distancing yourself from any emotion that could be a threat, relearning to feel is like relearning to breathe. It requires patience, it requires time, it requires will, but it also brings something that once seemed impossible, peace. And this peace doesn't come from the absence of danger, but from the certainty that it's no longer necessary to carry so much weight. Because in the end, always living on the defensive has never meant being safe, only being trapped. And now that this prison has started to dissolve, the only thing left is to move forward, even without knowing exactly where to go, even without having all the answers. Because for the first time, there's no longer a need to control everything, only to feel. And maybe that will be enough. There's no turning back, the weight is left behind, and the path is now different. Feeling is not weakness. Taking off the armor isn't losing, it's finally living. What comes next? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure. Nothing will ever be the same. Comment. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever been disarmed by a single word? Subscribe for more content like this. Leave your like and share.